What's up, y'all? Welcome back to the Mining Pod News Roundup. We got a duo show today with your boy Colin and your boy Will. Mr. Foxley, how are we today?
No, Matt, I miss him already.
Yeah, I miss him. He's down and out. He's sick. The sickness might have been inspired by Texas getting that ass whooped in the college football semifinals. But this is not a sports show, so I won't go into that right now.
He's a UT fan. That's funny.
Yeah, he is.
Very nice, very nice. No, I feel like everyone's sick right now. So
everyone's sick right now. It's all of that. It's the strange fog coming in. It's the Wuhan round 2, and also not a conspiracy show. That's for Writer's Room, which we will record tomorrow on Friday.
Hey, we're Bitcoiners. A few conspiracies are fine.
Put on the little Alex Jones tinfoil hat. Anyway, so for today's show, we've got the usual difficulty and Bitcoin mining metric update. We've got a big update on litigation regarding Swan Bitcoin news that Blockspace broke this week of Tether taking Swan to court in the UK in Her Majesty's court system. We've got a titillating story on the US blacklisting certain Chinese companies over TSMC and Huawei chip crossovers, or TSMC chips being crossed over into Huawei devices. A pretty interesting story that went under the radar of potential OFAC sanctioning from some mining pools from a researcher, B10C. And for this week's Cry Corner, an AAVE, I'm not a shit corner, so I don't know these things, proposal from the Blockware team for AAVE to establish a Bitcoin reserve via Bitcoin mining. But first, before we dive into it, a word from our cherished sponsors.
Are you a retail or institutional investor interested in Bitcoin mining companies? The Miner Mag brings you free data and analysis from all major NASDAQ-listed Bitcoin mining operations to know who stands out. Check out visualized metrics and data-dependent stories at theminermag.com. Thanks for listening to The Mining Pod. Want more? Subscribe to our main feed on Apple, Spotify, YouTube, or wherever else you get your podcasts for another weekly show on Bitcoin stocks. And check out our newsletter at miningpod.blockspace.media today.
All right, and we're back. Will, you are our difficulty weatherman today. So tell us, what are we seeing in the Bitcoin network tea leaves?
That's right. It's Thursday, January 16th at 2:30 p.m. as of recording. And in the weather report this week, brought to you by our friends over at Hash Rate Index, we're not seeing too much. Estimated difficulty adjustment down 3%, which is different than the last few weeks. As noted in last week's stream, we've had only upwards for a little bit. Now we're going downwards. Bitcoin price did hit over 100K again over the last 24 hours. See how long that lasts for. We seem to be glued to 95, 100K range bound. That's about it at the moment. 803 exahash for network hash rate the last 7 days. We're only 30% into this epoch, so we got a little bit to go. Anything pop up to you?
I mean, we've had 2, 4, 6, 8 positive adjustments in a row.
Yeah, so we're due for negative.
That we are due for a negative, and that is 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, 9. That's the most in a row since the summer of 2021, which was right after the China mining ban, when Bitcoin's difficulty cratered after like half of the network's hash rate went offline. So just to give some context there, that's pretty tremendous. Hash price is not really doing anything drastically different. It's been bouncing between, $50 and $60 per petahash per day for,
a little
about,
bit.
For about a month now. Maybe a little bit longer, 3 months or so. So nothing crazy. Yeah, ever since Bitcoin rallied in November, we were at like 43. Now it's back up to like 50, 60-ish, depending on the day. Nothing crazy other than the fact that miners are just relentlessly deploying hash rate. So you love to see it and you hate to see it if you're mining, because you are constantly in a tug of war with everyone else. All right. I think that's it for the difficulty update. Nothing too crazy. Hopefully, like Will said, we get a downward adjustment this next adjustment period.
We hope it goes down.
Yeah, we do hope it goes down.
Let's move over to the news we broke this week over at Blockspace.
Big news, at least for us, because this is a story we've been tracking since September of last year, this legal battle that Swan is engaged in with its former employees and now with Tether. So just some context behind this headline that Tether sues Swan Bitcoin in ongoing Bitcoin mining dispute. In September of last year, listeners of the pod and readers of Blockspace know that Swan opened legal action against former contractors and employees, specifically their company Proton Management and its employees. Proton Management was a company that was started by these employees when they left Swan. These employees were tasked with managing Swan's Bitcoin mining JV that it established with Tether back in 2022. This was Swan's entire Bitcoin mining business, basically. You know, Swan announced in 2022 that it was getting into Bitcoin mining. You could buy rigs through Swan and they would host them for you. This was kind of a big play. River did something similar at the time. I think it was kind of this like Bitcoin mining financial institution package that they like to give to their clients. And all that being said, it seems as though the employees that are now at Proton Management and potentially Tether lost faith in Swan's ability to competently manage that business line, and Swan employees left and started this new company at the behest of Tether. Now, some important things to note, given that Swan is suing those employees. Swan owned 20% to Tether's 80% of that business. So Tether was the primary stakeholder. This joint venture was called 2040 Energy, and Swan could not actually realize any of the revenue or profit from that venture until Tether was paid back for all the capital that it invested in that business. So why does this matter? All of that context aside, Swan did not sue Tether in that first lawsuit. It sued its former employees and the new company Proton Management. But now Tether is more or less countersuing because they're involved in all of this, right? They were the ones who asked the employees to jump ship to Proton Management to manage the mining assets for Tether. Tether is now suing Swan Bitcoin in UK court, with 2040 Energy as a co-claimant in the case. Again, 2040 Energy is that JV. And this was opened in a court in the UK. A Tether representative said Tether, together with its co-claimant 2040 Energy, has recently commenced proceedings in the High Court of England and Wales against Swan. Throughout our relationship with Swan, Tether has consistently acted in good faith, supported mutual business objectives, and adhered to all relevant agreements. Conversely, Tether claimed, Swan has acted recklessly and their actions have resulted in significant breaches by them of the agreements between us. Consequently, we have been compelled to take necessary measures to protect our investment. When we reached out to Swan, a Swan spokesperson said Swan will vigorously defend all of its rights and declined to comment further. So pretty big news, an escalation. Now Swan fighting a two-front legal battle, one on the offensive against its former employees and contractors, and now on the defensive against Tether. So a lot of context. Thanks for hanging in there with me, guys. And Will, what are your thoughts on this? Any second takes?
Crazy story. I mean, this is huge. So Swan, the Bitcoin brand over the last 4 years, I would say in a lot of ways, they hired all the influencers. They hired all the podcasters, except for the Minor Pod. And they built up this entire engine, this coalition of Bitcoin maxis who were against fiat, who were against the shitcoiners, who were trying to take out SBF, trying to take out Binance, trying to take out Mashinsky. And 4 years later, what do we find? There are problems within this company, within Swan. And, this happens to everyone. These are all allegations. We don't know what's going to happen quite yet. But if I was sued in high court by Tether, I'd be a little nervous. And if I was maybe a Swan employee or someone working with them, I'd be a little nervous that the largest stablecoin is suing the company I work with or work for in high court in the UK. Some notes on this while we were doing the investigative pieces on this. We could not get the filing for this because the UK doesn't have the same system as the US. So a lot of people have asked us for the filing. That won't be available unless you are able to get it from the court itself. So that's Tether's filing against Swan. So we're going to try. Fingers crossed. We're working on getting that. But we did confirm with both parties that this lawsuit was indeed filed. The High Court in the UK, so this court really handles international disputes of large capital denominations, which obviously figures into this one. According to the own Swan deck that we got our hands on, they had 84 million in revenue for H1 2024 just for this mining JV. And so like that's a lot of capital on hand. And I believe this mining operation is racing upwards of 10 exahash at this point. I mean, when it launched, it was around over 5 exahash. And I know it's been growing pretty steadily.
Yeah, in the filings, I think it was listed as 11.5 as of September, probably more now. And I'm glad that you mentioned the revenue from the mining operation for the first half of 2024, because I want to give some context here, because I think this really gets to the meat of why this is happening and why everything's fallen through in this whole joint venture. So here is a screenshot from Swan's summer investor deck from 2024. Note this 2023 revenue for Swan's financial business. It's 6 million. And their estimate for 2024 is 13 million. Compare that to the 84 million just for the first half of 2024 for the mining arm, none of which is can legally go to Swan because of the way the joint venture was structured.
Yes.
Now, I think this is crucial because obviously Swan wants to have this business line under its umbrella, even if it can't claim any of the revenue, because obviously there's growth here, right? But I think at the core of this, I'm alleging this, I know nothing about the actual, I cannot substantiate any of this from our reporting, but this is the gut feeling that we got from reporting on this last year. Swan, it almost seems like Swan was trying to use the Bitcoin mining vertical to inflate its growth and show that it has potential for much more revenue than it's currently bringing in from its financial services line, which is true. Once 100% of the capital was recouped to Tether, they would then, I guess, have what, like 20% of the profits they would have claimed to those. Allegedly.
Yeah, they had claim on the profits after 100% of the invested capital is paid back, and then you get 20% of the JV. Now, of course, we don't have the filing yet. So the only filings we have are from the California court, which is against the former members of the JV and Swan employees who allegedly stole IP and stole laptops.
Yeah, and that's at the center of the case, too. This is the other really important point, is that Swan is saying that the employees stole proprietary information. A lot of the filings deal with like company laptops, which is really funny because this is like a $100 million annual recurring revenue business line. And they're like, give us back the laptops. And also they said that they stole their controls, or it's called BNOC. Yeah, it was software for monitoring the Bitcoin mining operation. But they didn't make any claims about stealing anything else, like machines or infrastructure, because they probably don't have legal claim to it. So like the last point I'll make on this, because I do think this is at the core of this, the question that is kind of looming in the background of this is how much did Swan use the Bitcoin mining line as part of its pitch for when it was trying to raise a Series C with the hopes to go public? Because that was
part of that Series C, right?
What's up?
Tether was supposed to be part of the Series C, and the funding was pulled, and that was public from Corey. The CEO of Swan.
And that's the drama that's going on in the background of all of this too, is they had to scuttle their Series C. They were trying to go public. They scuttled that. And this whole thing really, I think, it's like, it was a turd in the punch bowl for Swan, so to speak, with regards to their hopes of going public. And I think more will come out, obviously, once these decisions are reached.
Once the filing is out.
Yeah, once the filing is out, and also once this other lawsuit. Yeah, really, once this, we'll know more with this Tether lawsuit, because Tether is going to come guns blazing with any accusations that they have about what actually happened. The truth is always in the middle, for sure. But I'm just really curious to see how much of the mining venture was part of that pitch for the IPO and the Series C, because if it could be, it could be the big stink in all of this. Anyway.
Last thoughts from my side. If you want more information on this, go check out our reporting. We'll link it in the show notes. We've been covering this. We broke the news on the first lawsuit in California. We broke the news on the UK High Court. So we've been following this. And if you've been listening to podcasts, we've done a few on the Swan Tether drama. I am interested to see the filing, just to know the scope of Tether's Bitcoin mining ambitions. I'm sure there's going to be some revelations within that. I think that they are investing more in Bitcoin mining than people are aware of. The things that we have public are their investment in BitDeer, their investments in Northern Data, and some of their tweets saying that they're mining Bitcoin in El Salvador and elsewhere. So I think that they have one of the largest private mining operations globally, and we just don't have a lot of information on that compared to other miners. And I think public miners would be very interested in knowing more about their competition. So that's probably the biggest thing mining related I'm interested in.
Today's show is brought to you by Digital Shovel. Digital Shovel is a leading manufacturer of modular mining pods as well as PDUs and switchgears. Unlike many other competitors, their product is designed and manufactured in North America with a complete UL inspection on the entire unit, not just individual components. Additionally, Digital Shovel is one of the most vertically integrated manufacturers of over 75,000 square feet of sheet metal shop, SMT and wave solder PCB assembly, as well as final assembly all under one roof in Toronto, Canada. Their price point leads the industry when compared to products with rates as low as $69,000 per megawatt for a complete data center with smart PDUs and switchgears. To learn more, visit digitalshovel.com.
Big story that's not technically mining related, but mining adjacent and could affect one of the largest companies in the space. US blacklist Chinese companies over TSMC chips and Huawei processors. Will, get us up to speed. What's going on here?
Yeah, so Reuters reported this yesterday. This was flying around Telegram chats and mining groups, especially the initial reports on this Sophgo company, I believe came out in November from the Miner Mag. And then I believe it was also in the information. Essentially, Sophgo is an AI chip company that is owned by Micree Zhan, who is the owner of Bitmain or CEO of Bitmain. He was the co-founder with Jihan Wu. They obviously had that breakout and fallout back in 2019, 2020. Jihan went on and founded BitDeer, and they're obviously making their ASIC now, which we've done a lot of shows on. And Micree is still running Bitmain. The thing that came to light during our own actually investigations into a lot of this was that the Sophgo chip was finding its way into certain Bitmain parts. And the US government and initially TSMC actually did not like this because Sophgo has had some relationship with Huawei, which was obviously blacklisted in the United States quite a while ago. It was an AI chip that had some backdoors built into it for watching people, and the US government banned it from the US. Sophgo was a supplier of some relation to them, and it was initially banned from TSMC, which was the Miner Mag story. And then as of yesterday, we have this Reuters story saying that it's been put on a commercial blacklist for the United States. Now, the follow-up for importance for Bitmain, obviously, is this chip still being used in some of the control boards for Bitcoin miners? And will the new administration care about this? Will the old administration pass on this information in the Commerce Department and see certain Bitmain units seized or stopped at borders or not? Now, the block space investigation we did based on talking to brokers is that certain Bitmain units were stopped at borders, but it was unclear exactly the linkage between Sophgo in those stoppages. There seemed to be, or probable that there were stoppages because of this, but that was never confirmed by government agencies. But now we have this from the Commerce Department. Sophgo units are not welcome in the United States anymore. And now the question is this a heightened concern for Bitmain, or is Bitmain safe now from further scrutiny?
Yeah, that's the big looming question, right? And going back to the story that we broke about units being held at ports of entry, specifically the T21 had control boards that use Sophgo chips, certain ones, right? So like these mining ASICs will have different components. Some use different control boards, like they'll use Xilinx control boards, BeagleBone control boards, and Logic control boards. And some of those control boards had Sophgo chips. And we think, although like Will said, we couldn't confirm that the US or these US agencies like the FCC were targeting T21s and S21s in concert because they just didn't understand where the chips were on which ones. We have heard that some of the machines are still being held by some of the companies that have tried to import them which is crazy because it's been months at this point. I mean, it's been what, 2, 3, 4 months. And it doesn't seem like there's any clear resolution for that. Now, we spoke to one source that said they don't think this is going to be a problem for Bitmain because it's not Bitmain's hardware, like specifically the ASIC chips that are using Sophgo technology. It's just the control boards. So he thinks that they're in the clear. TBD whether or not that passes muster. And you raised an interesting question about what will the new administration do versus the last administration, because a Trump administration is almost certainly going to be a little more hawkish towards China. The Trump administration, the Trump administration was the first administration, or the administration, to levy tariffs, 25% tariffs, up to 30% tariffs on Chinese goods. The Biden administration kept that in place. But I think that Trump and most of the Republican cohort are a little more hawkish towards China in a way that the Democrats haven't been. But who knows whether or not that spills over into this. I think that the Trump administration will be more favorable towards Bitcoin mining in general. So it does become a question of, do they really care enough? I think that's the other thing about a lot of this. It's like, is Bitmain really that much of a concern to the US government that they actually are going to put them on an entity list? Yeah. There's been kind of scare tactics about, you've seen the New York Times articles about Chinese Bitcoin mines being outside of military bases and things like that. Maybe there's some fire to that smoke. Maybe it's just propaganda to, jab the Bitcoin mining industry a little bit, that's, seeing some hostility from government agencies. But there's so much wrapped up in this. Part of me, it's hard sometimes just to separate the signal from the noise. And I really do wonder, it's like, we spend all of our time in Bitcoin mining news, but it's like none of this is really that big of a priority, I think, for government agencies. Right? Like, I don't think that it's that, unless there really is something to, Chinese mines being next to military bases and they're actually trying to steal information. But outside of that, it's like, do they really care that much about Bitmain machines? I don't know.
I think you get these people within government agencies whose jobs are lined up with taking things out. Their purpose is to monitor stuff, and they do have unwarranted ability to survey and execute decisions on companies, which is unfortunate. We live in a US state that can do that, but that's a whole different conversation. I think for Bitcoin miners, it's kind of a funny spot, right? Because a lot of Bitcoin miners went to Mar-a-Lago, they had the meetings with Trump, they talked about Bitcoin mining in the US, and perhaps the information was not brought across to Trump that most of these Bitcoin miners are using machines not built in the US. Now, this is the pitch for Aradyne and for Block, and arguably for maybe MicroBT and the Seal miner from Bitdeer. And they are trying to put those, at least the assembly, in the US, if not completely making it in the United States. But for Bitmain, which still assembles a lot of machines in China, that is still an asterisk. Now, of course, a lot of the machines that are assembled in China are not sold to the United States. They're sold to Russia or other countries. But this is a difficult one for Bitmain to explain. And it's kind of funny for Bitcoin miners to be like, hey, we're pro-US, you should mine Bitcoin here. But we're also buying units from a $50 billion company that's based in China.
Yeah, but by the way, 80% of the network hash rate comes from this one company that's Chinese.
Yeah, this one Chinese company that has ties to, the CCP in some regards. But all Chinese companies do in some way, because that's a lot of how you do business on there.
They literally have to. Once a company gets big enough in China, they have a board member who is a CCP plant, basically.
Yeah. So I think we'll have to wait and see. I think the question for Bitcoin miners that's existential is what happens to your supply of ASICs if Bitmain goes heads up. That seems very unlikely at this point. A blanket sanction seems unlikely after the Sophgo thing. I would say that that's probably an isolated incident and we could move on at this point. But it could be interpreted the other way, where it's an escalation. Sophgo's been hit. What's next? We do have administration changing now, so we'll have to wait and see.
100%. A lot of open questions. All right. Speaking of things that are top down from the state, regulatory in nature, and are fucking with Bitcoin mining, 15 OFAC-sanctioned transactions missing from blocks. This is not anything that got picked up by the news cycle. It was a research report authored by B10C, a really good Bitcoin analyst and developer.
One of our favorites.
One of our favorites. Always has really good data on Bitcoin mining. I believe he built the stratum.work website, right? Which helps people differentiate between proxy pooling and straight up template building for mining pools. So it's like you can use stratum.work to see which miners may be proxying their hash rate to other mining pools. So anyway, all that being said, this developer did some analysis recently, and they came to the conclusion that F2Pool might be censoring OFAC-sanctioned transactions from their blocks. So I'm not going to get into all the nitty-gritty of this because it's pretty long. I recommend y'all go and read it. But he looked at a number of blocks and saw that some transactions that should have been included, that were also included on the OFAC sanctions list, or that were sent from addresses included on the OFAC sanctions list, were not included in the blocks. Like some of these transactions were sitting in, the mempool for like 3 hours. Transaction fees have been really low recently. There hasn't been that much transaction activity, so that seems kind of weird. These are transactions that should have been included much more quickly than that. And, basically what the developer stipulates in here is that it seems as though F2Pool may be filtering OFAC-sanctioned transactions again. We've seen this from F2Pool in the past. Obviously, we also have covered on the pod before. This is something that Mara did for some time back in, I believe, 2021, where they built filters where they weren't including OFAC-sanctioned transactions and transactions from OFAC-sanctioned addresses. And that lasted for like a month or two because it was just such a brutal hit to their revenue. And currently, this is the important context here too. There is nothing in the legal code, or there have been no edicts or notices from agencies in the U.S. or an act from Congress that says that mining pools can't process these transactions. But the reason why some mining pools don't include them is because this is kind of this gray area, right? Like Elizabeth Warren issued that, or sponsored a bill, I believe it was in 2023, maybe it was 2024, which tried to get miners and node operators branded as money transmitter businesses. So like you would have to get a money transmitter license to mine Bitcoin or run a node, which is just ridiculous for anyone who knows how any of this works. But that's the fear, right? Is that eventually a government agency or Congress could come and say, you're processing these transactions, you're in the payment flow. Therefore, you need to abide by these rules and these laws. I will say it's kind of weird that it's coming from F2Pool, which is not a US entity.
Yeah.
So I don't really understand why F2Pool specifically is doing this. Like you would expect this from Foundry, right? Like you don't expect this from a non-US based pool.
So F2Pool has done this before. I've seen some stuff around them, like possibly doing OFAC sanctions, I think from B10C as well. I think for F2Pool, it's a little confusing given that they are not a US-based company. It doesn't seem that the CEO and founder, Chen Wang, is super involved these days either. Kind of seems to just be kind of flying around. He's a Bitcoin billionaire, longtime Bitcoiner. And so it must be that they're kind of getting a little more corporate and making decisions internally on this sort of thing. That's the only insights I can glean on it. Now, for the OFAC sanctions, I do think that this is long-term going to happen for almost all major pools, regardless. I think for the Mara case, it wasn't a revenue thing as much as a reputation hit, right? They got pretty flamed on Twitter, and they're a public company. So like, I think that maybe that's where they saw the pain is a stock. F2Pool doesn't have to deal with that negative blowback. And
right.
I think for mine operators, when they think about this, they have like legal considerations on one side, but also the consideration that no matter what, these blocks are going to be mined if the fee is right. At some point, someone's going to pick it up and put it into a block. And to date, there's been no precedent that the US government's going to go after you for it. So Yeah, it's kind of like a internal decision. I don't care either way because I think someone's going to mine these transactions at some point. The only cases where it gets a little weird is the validator-based systems like ETH, where they've had problems with this in the past, where you'll get like 95% of the network won't validate certain transactions that are on the OFAC list. And that gets into territory where it's pretty hard. Like you only have a 5% chance over time of getting picked up. You will get picked up over time, but it's not like the best system, the most robust censorless system as opposed to Bitcoin mining. I think if we have 30% of pools still okay with processing a transaction like this, there's not that much to be concerned about. The last thing I want to bring up while we're talking about pools, though, is how close we're getting to over 40% with Foundry. I think as of last week, really? Foundry was over 40%, which is pretty crazy. I mean, AMP pool's just declining in terms of like overall percentage. That being said, a lot of the proxy pools associated with AMP pool are still doing pretty solid. So yeah, it does seem to be like a growing percentage there.
That's wild. Yeah. So according to Hashrate Index, Foundry over the last month has averaged 35% of blocks.
Yes.
AMP pool's down to 17.7, which is pretty crazy because that to me indicates that some of these new pools are eating into AMP pool's market share, maybe in jurisdictions outside of the US. But part of me wonders if AMP pool is not just like splintering off its hash rate. Like this, they don't have this marked, but over the last month, 15.7% is coming from other. And I wonder what that other is.
Yeah.
Sometimes pools will like stop signing their blocks, and this will happen to where you have like, you have hash rate concentrated in a slice of the pie where it says other, and you have no idea who it's coming from, but it's actually one of the usual suspects. But 35% from Foundry is wild. Definitely not the best. And something that I wonder if, per their recent financial struggles, right? We broke a story where they laid off almost a third or around a third of their employees. Does that change as Foundry starts trying to increase pool fees, or if people lose faith in Foundry as a mining pool operator? Because part of the reason why Foundry was able to supercharge its growth is they just gave people 0% fees almost indefinitely. They like slowly started ratcheting that up, but their pool fees were artificially low because they were just eating into their invested capital and stomaching the difference. So something to keep an eye on, I think, as Foundry kind of goes through some turbulence.
In the competitive world of Bitcoin mining, one name stands out: CleanSpark, America's Bitcoin miner. At CleanSpark, efficiency isn't just a goal, it's our standard. Our sophisticated facilities are built and led by expert teams who care about Bitcoin and the communities we work in. Scale? We've mastered it. Our large-scale operations have set us apart in the industry as examples of community-oriented building. Our track record speaks for itself. We navigate the complexities of the new economy with precision and with skill, continuously achieving operational milestones. Curious about how we do it? We invite you to discover the story behind CleanSpark's success at cleanspark.com.
Okay, last story for the day. Cry Corner. Ready for
Cry Corner?
Little Cry Corner.
On this one, Will.
This is a fun story. It actually happened this morning, so Thursday morning. Matthew Siegel, I believe he's with Van Eck or Van Eck. A lot of hard pronounced names over here for this story. He wanted to talk about, or he tweeted about AAVE, a Ethereum lending protocol, possibly adding a Bitcoin mining strategy to its treasury. So back up the truck. What is AAVE? AAVE was launched around 2020. It's basically a platform where you take your ETH, you put it on the platform, and then you can loan stable coins or other tokens against it. They also have like wrap Bitcoin and other things you can loan against. And it's actually pretty useful. So like if you're an ETH whale or you're someone who has like a lot of a cryptocurrency and you want to take stable coins and maybe cash out and use that, AAVE, great platform to use, long-standing history of doing well. One of the Blockware team members jumped into their chat and proposed that they use their Bitcoin treasury to buy some Bitcoin miners and then generate yield with the Bitcoin from mining it, and then sell the ASICs back at a good point in the market. So they put out this whole strategy for doing so, talking about how right now you can buy S21s and there's like a really good revenue projection for these things. And then also units are cheaper right now compared to history. And so if you buy them now, hold for 6 months to a year or something, you can sell them back. Now, there's a lot of thoughts on this from my side. Like having done the hosted game myself with 2 companies and also having worked at a hosting company, like I understand the pitch very, very well. And like it can work out in some ways because like, yes, you do earn Bitcoin on the capital you invest. Yes, you can flip the ASICs back. But I think they like put a very rosy sales pitch into this chat, into this DAO. And when I first read it, I actually thought it was like from someone who didn't know Bitcoin mining because of just how it read. And so I had a few critiques, which I'll mention here. To be fair, though, I think this is a sales pitch and they're pitching out into the open. So that does take a little bit balls just to kind of put your sales pitch out there. And I will give them credit for that. To the problems I had with it. One, they said that you can earn Bitcoin mining with no heavy lifting by using Blockware or like a hosted mining solution. They're saying Blockware here because that's who's pitching it. I chime back that like machines break, there's taxes, there's disputes with the hosts. It can be a headache. And I've had to deal with all of these things myself. They also mentioned that you can buy S21 XP air-cooled units and get 33% net annualized return. I mentioned that like with difficulty, it's hard to know your return. They chime back later that like you can do an annualized return and there's some like fair metrics on that. I would agree with them. I would just say like when you're doing a pitch like this, you do have to take into account difficulty. And the last thing they mentioned was hardware appreciation. And I chime back, hardware sometimes appreciates, but that's a trade. And it's a trade with not a lot of liquidity. Like you have to go and find a buyer who wants to buy a used machine. And for a DAO-like structure where people are basically voting on a DAO treasury and Discord, I'm not sure that's the best investment. I would say overall for this, go and buy Bitcoin. Mining Bitcoin for a DAO doesn't necessarily make sense because there are so many things you have to do in the meat space to make this practical, and it's hard. But I would applaud the Blockware team for thinking of a different customer profile. Like there are these DAOs out there with a lot of capital sitting around, and they might jump at something like this. Celsius, I mentioned here, actually did something very similar. A lot of their underlying structure for generating Bitcoin yield was a very large mining operation that actually had some very good assets. We covered that on the mining pod quite a bit. But I do think the problem with it is structural. It's hard to get a good contract. It's hard to manage a mining site. It's hard to get the tax solution correct. It's hard to sell the units on time. And it's probably not something a DAO should necessarily do versus just buy treasuries or buy Bitcoin. Thoughts, Colin?
I think you covered it. You know, I'm
Nice.
looking at the hash cost of an S19 XP or S21 XP right now. It's like $24.3 per day. Is that right? No, I'm not going to go into this because I don't think I did my math.
I mean, there's some like fair things on like you can make money right now for sure. But again, I just don't know if it's a great use for a company treasury.
For sure.
To be investing in something like this.
Yeah, so the hash cost, I did this right. The hash cost of an S21 XP is $24.3 per petahash per day. Hash price is like $55 per petahash per day. That's great, but like per Will's point, you know, you don't know what hash price is going to be in 6 months or a year. And at, 7.5 cents is their rate. It's not really, I mean, for next gen hardware, you'll still have probably positive margin if things get iffy, but that's not really great. I mean, that's the problem with a lot of just hosting in general, right? Unless it's an institutional client and they're getting preferential rates because they're bringing in a lot of hash rate, you're kind of capitalizing on information asymmetry. Like the host has to get paid, right? It's a business model. And most of the people doing it are not going to actually make a return on it. Like, especially if it's like, that's assuming 100% uptime, which just doesn't happen.
So uptime is a concern for sure. And then the last part is like 7 cents, 7.5 cents, 8 cents now. That's that territory where things can get rough. So if the market turns south, like you could be underwater for a lot of the time you're mining. There's ways to make money on 7 cents higher, but like you have to have a little bit more luck, a little more consistency on how that mining op goes. So better to stick towards that 6 cents. But some of these mining solutions are better, and like the hosting companies are getting better. They're heads and tails better than they were in 2020, 2021. There's actually like decent companies out there doing that. So, okay, 100%. That's my last rant for the Cry Corner.
Well, I think that does it.
That does it.
Yeah, covered it all. Thank you all for tuning in. We'll be back next week as always, and hope everyone has a beautiful weekend.
Cool. See you later.